Day 21 started with Marcus waking up on his couch again, his neck stiff and his back aching, and for the first time since the world ended, he felt something worse than fear or despair. He felt restless, caged, like the walls were closing in despite having food and water and safety. The greenhouse on the roof had solved their immediate survival problem, but it had also created a new one. Now that they weren't dying, they had to figure out how to actually live, and living in a single hallway with the same 11 family for weeks was starting to feel less like survival and more like slow suffocation. He could hear in the way people moved around their apartments, the pacing that went on for hours, the doors opening and closing as neighbors checked the barricade for 15th time that day, not because they thought it failed, but because they needed anything to do. Tyler and Ben had started doing push-ups in the hallway just to burn off energy. Denise had reorganized her apartment 3 times in the past week. Even Jim, who'd been the most level-headed of all of them, had started showing signs of cabin fever, snapping at his wife over nothing and then apologizing immediately after. They were going stir-crazy, all of them, and Marcus knew that if something didn't change, soon the safety they fought so hard to maintain would become its own kind of prison. The sounds from below had been getting louder over the past few days, or maybe Marcus was just paying more attention to them now that he had mental space for something other than immediate survival. Shuffling footsteps on the 11th floor, scraping sounds that could be furniture being moved or bodies being dragged, occasional thuds that echoed up through the stairwell. Sometimes Marcus thought he heard voices, actual human voices calling out, but the sounds were so muffled and distorted by distance and concrete that he couldn't be sure if he was hearing survivors or if his mind was playing tricks on him. He'd mentioned it to Jim one morning while they were both checking the barricade, and Jim had nodded and said he'd heard it too, that he thought there might be people down there, trapped in their apartments the same way the 12th floor had been trapped, waiting for help that had never come. The idea that there were survivors just 1 floor below them, that they'd been living in parallel survival situations separated by nothing but some furniture and 12 feet of vertical space, had been eating at Marcus for days. How many people were down there? How many had food left? How many were injured or sick or dying while Marcus sat in his apartment staring at the walls and doing nothing? The guilt was irrational. He'd done everything he could to survive, had helped build the barricade, had contributed to the community on the 12th floor, but it was there nonetheless, gnawing at him, making the restlessness worse. Around noon, Marcus found himself standing in the hallway without really remembering the decision to leave his apartment, and he realized he wasn't alone. Jim was there too, standing at the barricade with his hand resting on the top of his old couch, staring at the furniture like he was trying to see through it to whatever waited on the other side. Tyler and Ben emerged from their apartment, both of them looking as restless as Marcus felt. Denise opened her door, saw the small gathering, and stepped out into the hallway. One by one, doors opened, and within a few minutes almost everyone on the floor was standing in the corridor, and Marcus realized they were all thinking the same thing, even if no one was saying it out loud. "We can't stay like this," Marcus said, breaking the silence, and his voice sounded loud in the quiet hallway. "Just sitting here, waiting, not knowing what's below us or if there are people who need help. We're going crazy doing nothing." Jim nodded slowly. "I've been thinking the same thing. We have food now, we have water, we have safety up here. But the rest of the building is unknown territory. Could be more undead, could be survivors, could be supplies we need. Could be dangerous," Mrs. Brennan said, her voice cautious. "We're safe here. Why risk that?" "Because safe isn't the same as living," Tyler said, and Marcus was surprised by the firmness in the young man's voice. "We're hiding. That's all we're doing. Just hiding and hoping someone else fixes this. But no one's coming. It's been 3 weeks and no one has come. Maybe it's time we start fixing things ourselves." The conversation that followed was tense. People breaking into camps almost immediately. those who wanted to maintain the status quo and stay safe on the 12th floor, and those who wanted to expand to secure more of the building, to find out what was down there and either rescue it or eliminate it. Marcus found himself firmly in the second camp, and so did Jim, Tyler, Ben, and surprisingly Denise. The Brennans were against it. The Kovacs stayed neutral, saying they'd support whatever the group decided. Naomi stood in her doorway with her 3 children behind her, and when she spoke her voice was quiet but carried weight. "David died getting food for us," she said. "Died because he thought we had no other options, because he thought he had to go out there into the city to save us. But we had options. We just didn't know about them yet. The greenhouse was right above us the whole time." She paused, looked down at her hands. I think about that a lot. About how close help was. About how if we'd known, if we'd looked, he might still be alive. So, yes, we should look. We should find out what's down there. Because if there are people 1 floor below us dying while we sit up here safe and fed, then we're no better than the Kovacs were when they kept the greenhouse secret. The Kovacs flinched at that, but didn't argue, because Naomi was right, and they knew it. The vote, when it came, wasn't unanimous, but it was decisive. They would attempt to secure the building, floor by floor, started with the 11th and working their way down. The question then became who would actually do it, who would take on the risk of going into unknown territory filled with potential undead and trying to clear it. Marcus volunteered immediately, the words coming out of his mouth before he'd fully thought them through, driven by that restless energy and the need to do something, anything, that felt like forward motion. Jim volunteered next, and Marcus felt a surge of gratitude for a man who'd been a stranger 3 weeks ago and had somehow become the closest thing to a friend in this nightmare. They would be the primary team, the 2 of them, clearing the building together. Others could help as needed, but the core responsibility would be theirs. Naomi disappeared into her apartment and emerged a moment later carrying David's gun, the pistol that her husband had used to end his own life after bringing food back to his family. Her hands were shaking as she held out to Marcus, and he could see tears in her eyes. "He'd want to be used to protect people," she said. "To help people. Please take it. And there's still some ammunition in the apartment. Not much, but some." Marcus took the gun carefully, feeling the weight of it in his hand, the weight of what it represented. "Thank you," he said quietly, and meant it for more than just a weapon. Mr. Kovac had gone back into his apartment too, and when he returned he was carrying a machete, the blade gleaming and sharp, clearly well-maintained. "From our gardening supplies," he said, offering it to Jim. "We use it for a clearing brush and cutting thick stems. It should work just as well on." He trailed off, but everyone understood. Jim took the machete and gave it a few test swings, nodding with satisfaction. They gathered more weapons from around the floor. Marcus's baseball bat, Tyler's crowbar, kitchen knives from multiple apartments, anything that could be used to fight if the gun ran out of ammunition. It was a pathetic arsenal compared to what they'd need in a real fight, but it was what they had, and it would have to be enough. The plan took shape over the next hour, everyone contributing ideas, working through scenarios. They dismantled part of the barricade each morning, just enough for Marcus and Jim to slip through. They'd clear the floor below apartment by apartment, disposing of any undead bodies in the basement incinerator. Once a floor was cleared and secured, Naomi volunteered to come through with cleaning supplies, to scrub away the blood and gore and disinfect everything to prevent disease from spreading. Any supplies found in empty apartments would be brought back and distributed equally among all survivors. Any living people found would be brought up to the 12th floor and integrated into the community. Each cleared floor would be left accessible but monitored, expanding their safe zone downward until they'd secured the entire building from roof to ground floor. It was ambitious, maybe impossible, but it was something, and something was better than nothing. As the sun started setting on day 21, Marcus and Jim stood at the barricade, looking at the furniture they'd spent so much effort stacking and arranging, and prepared to tear a hole in their defenses for the first time since they'd built them. The other neighbors gathered to watch, to help, to bear witness to this new phase of their survival. Tyler and Ben helped move Jim's couch to the side, creating a gap just wide enough for a person to slip through. Marcus looked through that gap into the dim stairwell beyond, saw the shadows and the unknown, and felt his heart hammering in his chest. Tomorrow they'd go through. Tomorrow they'd find out what was waiting on the 11th floor, whether it was salvation or death or something in between. Tonight they'd prepare, check their weapons, try to sleep despite the adrenaline, and hope they were making the right choice. Marcus went back to his apartment and sat on his couch with David's gun in his lap, checking the magazine, counting the bullets. 8 rounds, plus whatever ammunition Naomi had said she'd gather. Not a lot, not nearly enough if things went wrong. But it was something, and after 3 weeks of doing nothing but surviving, taking action felt like the most important thing in the world, even if that action might get him killed. He thought about David, about the sacrifice the man had made, about the bites covering his arms and the bags of food he'd refused to let anyone touch. Thought about how David had walked down those stairs knowing he wasn't coming back, choosing his ending rather than becoming one of the monsters. If Marcus died tomorrow clearing the building, at least he'd die trying to help people, die moving forward instead of just waiting for the end. That felt important somehow. That felt like it mattered. Outside his window, the city was dark, except for fires that still burned in scattered locations, smaller now, running out of fuel. The undead were down there somewhere, wandering the darkness, and tomorrow Marcus would be walking into their territory voluntarily, would be seeking them out instead of hiding from them. The thought should have terrified him, but instead he felt oddly calm, purposeful in a way he hadn't felt since before the world ended. He had a mission now, a goal beyond just surviving one more day. He was going to clear this building, going to make it safe, going to find anyone trapped below and give them the same chance at survival the 12th floor had found. And if he died trying, well, at least he'd die as himself, die human, die fighting. That was more than a lot of people had gotten in the past 3 weeks. Marcus set the gun on his coffee table, lay down on his couch, and closed his eyes, knowing sleep would be difficult but necessary. Tomorrow the real work began. Day 21, 8 in the morning, and Marcus stood at the gap in the barricade with Jim beside him, both of them armed and trying to look more confident than they felt. Marcus had David's gun tucked into his waistband, the weight of it unfamiliar and heavy, while Jim held a machete in one hand and a crowbar in the other. Tyler and Ben were helping to widen the gap just enough for them to slip through, moving furniture as quietly as possible even though stealth felt pointless when they had no idea what was waiting on the other side. Marcus exchanged one last look with Jim, saw his own fear reflected back at him, and then stepped through the opening into the stairwell beyond. The first thing that hit him was the smell, rot and decay and something worse, something organic breaking down in ways it wasn't meant to. The emergency lighting was still functioning, casting everything in that dim red glow that made shadows deeper and distances harder to judge. Marcus descended the stairs slowly, each footstep sounding impossibly loud in the silence, his heart hammering so hard he could feel it in his throat. Jim followed close behind, and together they reached the 11th floor landing and stopped, listening. Shuffling sounds. Definitely shuffling, coming from somewhere down the hallway. Marcus pulled out the gun, his hand shaking slightly, and reminded himself that he'd only ever fired a gun once in his life, at a shooting range for a friend's bachelor party, and he'd been terrible at it. Jim raised a machete, nodded, and Marcus pushed open the stairwell door. The 11th floor hallway looked almost identical to the 12th. Same layout, same apartment doors, same industrial carpet. But it felt completely different because of what was standing in it. 3 of them, undead, swaying in place near apartment 11F, their clothes torn and stained. Their movements, that jerking puppet-like motion Marcus had seen from his window, but never up close. Up close it was worse. So much worse. because he could see their faces, could see the remnants of who they'd been before whatever this plague would have taken them. One of them had been a woman in a business suit. One had been a teenage boy. One had been someone's grandfather. Now they were just shells, and when they turned toward the sound of the door opening, Marcus saw their eyes, cloudy and empty and hungry. The woman lunged first, faster than Marcus expected, and he stumbled backward as Jim swung the machete in a wide arc that caught her in the shoulder. The blade bit deep, but she didn't react to pain, just kept coming, and Jim had to yank the machete free and swing again, this time catching her neck. It took 3 hits before she finally dropped, and by then the other 2 were moving toward them. Marcus raised a gun with both hands the way he'd seen in movies, aimed at the teenage boy's head, and pulled the trigger. The shot was deafening in the enclosed hallway, the recoil jerking his arms up, and he missed completely, the bullet sparking off the wall behind the target. He fired again, missed again, his hand shaking too badly for accuracy, and the undead boy was almost on him when the third shot finally connected, punching to the boy's forehead and dropping him instantly. The grandfather was coming for Jim, who'd gotten the machete stuck in the woman's spine and was struggling to free it. Marcus swung his aim toward the grandfather and fired twice, one shot missing, and one catching the side of the grandfather's head, but not stopping him. Jim abandoned the machete and grabbed his crowbar, swinging it like a baseball bat and connecting the grandfather's skull with a sickening crunch. It took 2 more hits before the grandfather stopped moving, and then the hallway was quiet except for Marcus and Jim's heavy breathing. Marcus looked at the 3 bodies on the floor, looked at the gun in his hand that now had only 3 bullets left in the magazine, and felt his stomach heave. He barely made it to the wall before he threw up, emptying what little breakfast he'd eaten onto the industrial carpet, while Jim stood watch, giving him space to fall apart for a moment. When Marcus could breathe again, when his hands had stopped shaking quite so badly, they began the methodical work of clearing the 11th floor apartment by apartment. Most were empty, doors unlocked, signs that people had evacuated quickly when the outbreak started, clothes scattered on floors, dishes still in sinks, TVs left on until the power had failed. But apartment 11C was locked from the inside, and when Jim knocked softly and called out, a voice answered, weak and terrified. It took 10 minutes of coaxing before the door finally opened to reveal an elderly couple, both of them thin to the point of emaciation, barely able to stand. They'd been sheltering in place for 3 weeks with whatever food they'd had in the apartment, had run out 5 days ago, had been waiting to die when they heard Jim's voice. Marcus and Jim helped them up to the 12th floor, where the other neighbors welcomed them with food and water and compassion, and Marcus felt something ease his chest at the sight of rescue actually working, of their plan having immediate, tangible results. Day 22 they returned to the 11th floor to finish clearing it, finding 2 more undead in apartments that had been left unlocked, dispatching them with more confidence now that they'd learned the rhythm of it. Stay at range, aim for the head, don't let them get close, work as a team. They found useful supplies scattered throughout the empty apartments, canned goods that hadn't been looted, bottles of water, medicine cabinets full of basic first aid supplies, batteries and flashlights and candles. Everything they found they carried up to the 12th floor for distribution. By the end of day 22, the 11th floor was clear, and Naomi came through with Denise and Mrs. Brennan, all 3 of them wearing gloves and masks, carrying buckets of soapy water and bottles of bleach. They scrubbed the blood from the walls and floors, disinfected every surface, disposed of the bodies by dragging them down to the basement incinerator, working with grim determination to erase the evidence of death and make the space livable again. Day 23, they moved to the 10th floor, and this time they had a system, had learned from their mistakes. Jim went first with a machete, Marcus covered with the gun. They cleared room by room in a pattern that minimized exposure and maximized safety. The 10th floor had more undead than the 11th, 6 of them scattered throughout the hallway and apartments, and the fighting was harder, more intense, but they'd gotten better at it, learned to work together, learned to read each other's movements. Marcus was down to his last bullet when they found her, a woman in apartment 10C with a young son, maybe 6 years old, both of them hiding in a bedroom closet surrounded by empty food wrappers and water bottles. The woman had a kitchen knife and nearly stabbed Jim before she realized they were human, were there to help, and then she broke down sobbing while her son clung to her leg and stared at Marcus and Jim with huge, terrified eyes. They brought her up to the 12th floor, watched as the other neighbors gathered around her, offering food and comfort and safety, and Marcus felt that same ease in his chest, that same sense that this was working, that they were actually making a difference. But day 23 also brought their first real close call. They were clearing apartment 10H, moving to the kitchen toward the bedrooms, when one of the undead that they thought was dead, a man they'd hit with a crowbar and left on the floor, suddenly grabbed Marcus's ankle. He went down hard, the gun skittering away across the linoleum, and the undead was pulling itself up his leg, its teeth snapping inches from his calf. Jim was there instantly, bringing the machete down on the thing's head. But for a few seconds, Marcus had felt the certainty of death, had felt those teeth about to break his skin and infect him. And when it was over, he sat on the kitchen floor shaking and trying not to think about how close he'd come to becoming one of them. They were more careful after that, made sure to double-check every body, made sure nothing was getting back up behind them. By the end of day 23, they'd cleared the 10th floor completely, found more supplies, rescued the woman and her son, and Naomi's cleaning crew was working their way through the apartments with the same systematic efficiency. They'd also found something else in apartment 10G, a stash of ammunition that someone had been hoarding, 2 boxes of bullets that fit David's gun. Marcus couldn't help but wonder if the person who'd stockpiled that ammunition was one of the bodies they'd put in the incinerator, if they'd died without ever using the supplies they'd gathered. He took the ammunition up to the 12th floor, reloaded the gun, and felt slightly less vulnerable knowing he had more than 1 bullet left. That night, Marcus stood at his window, looking down at the city, at the fires that were finally starting to die out, at the undead that still wandered in their thousands through the streets below. They'd cleared 2 floors in 3 days, had rescued 3 groups of survivors, had gathered useful supplies, and no one on the clearing team had been bitten or seriously injured. It felt like progress. It felt like they were actually reclaiming the building piece by piece, making it safe, making it theirs. But they were only 2 floors down out of 12, only a sixth of the way to ground level. And if the pattern held, if each floor had undead and survivors in danger, then they had weeks of this ahead of them, weeks of fighting in fear and hoping they didn't make a fatal mistake. Marcus thought about David again, about the sacrifice he'd made, about how he'd walked down these same stairs knowing he wasn't coming back. David had made it 3 blocks out into the city and back. Marcus was trying to make it 12 floors down inside a building, and it already felt impossible. But they'd started, and starting was the hardest part. They had momentum now, had a system, had proof that it could work. The elderly couple from 11C had already started helping in the greenhouse, working with the Kovacs to tend the plants. The woman from 10C and her son had been given an apartment on the 11th floor, welcomed into the community without hesitation. The supplies they gathered had been distributed equally, and morale on the 12th floor had improved dramatically. People weren't just surviving anymore. They were contributing, had purpose beyond making it through another day. Even the children seemed different, less haunted, more hopeful. Naomi's kids had started playing in the hallway again, their laughter sounding strange and wonderful. Tomorrow they'd look at the 9th floor, would make the decision about whether to keep pushing or take a day to rest and recover. Marcus was leaning toward pushing. The restless energy that had driven him to volunteer in the first place was still there, was maybe even stronger now that he'd seen actual results from their efforts. He wasn't going stir crazy anymore. He was too busy, too focused, too committed to the mission to have time for cabin fever. He had a purpose now, and purpose was better than safety. Purpose was better than just surviving. Purpose felt like living, And after 3 weeks of just trying not to die, living felt like the most important thing in the world. He cleaned David's gun methodically, checked the new ammunition, counted out the bullets. 32 rounds now. He sharpened his baseball bat's edge where he'd wrapped it with nails and screws, creating a crude but effective weapon. He laid out his clothes for tomorrow, made sure he had water and food in his pockets in case they got trapped somewhere. The routine of preparation was calming. Gave him something to focus on besides the fear, the constant awareness that tomorrow could be the day he made a mistake and paid for it with his life. Day 24, they hit the 9th floor and immediately knew it was going to be different from the previous 2 floors because they could hear the undead before they even opened the stairwell door, moaning, shuffling, the sound of bodies bumping against walls and furniture, more of them than Marcus and Jim had dealt with on any single floor so far. Jim looked at Marcus with an expression that said they should maybe reconsider, maybe go back up and get reinforcements. But Marcus shook his head and pushed the door open because backing down now felt like admitting defeat, like admitting they couldn't handle what the building was throwing at them. The 9th floor hallway was packed with undead, at least a dozen of them visible from the stairwell, more probably in the apartments, and Marcus felt his stomach drop as he realized they just walked into something significantly more dangerous than anything they'd faced before. They came as soon as the door opened, drawn by the sound and the movement, shambling toward the stairwell with that relentless hunger, and Marcus started firing, dropping the closest one with a headshot that he was more lucky than skilled to make. Jim waded in with a machete, cleaving to the nearest undead with brutal efficiency. But there were too many. They kept coming, and Marcus was burning through ammunition faster than he wanted to, each shot echoing an enclosed space, and probably drawing even more attention. They fought their way into the hallway, backs to the wall, working as a unit to thin out the horde, and it was brutal and exhausting and terrifying in a way the previous floors hadn't been. An undead woman in a bathrobe grabbed Marcus's jacket, and he had to shoot her point blank in the face to get free. The sound deafening, blood, and worse sprang across his chest. Jim took a hit to the shoulder from an undead man in a security uniform, the machete slipping in his grip, and for a moment Marcus thought they were going to be overrun, thought this was it, thought they'd pushed too far. But then Tyler and Ben appeared in the stairwell behind them, crowbars in hand, having heard the gunshots and come running despite the plan being for Marcus and Jim to work alone. The 4 of them together managed to push back the tide, clearing the hallway through sheer determination and violence, bodies piling up until Marcus lost count of how many they put down. When it was finally over, when the last undead had been dispatched and the hallway was silent except for their heavy breathing, Marcus counted his remaining bullets. 11 rounds left, less than half of what he'd started the day with. Jim's shoulder was bruised where the undead had grabbed him. Probably would turn ugly colors over the next few days, but no broken skin, no bites, no infection. Tyler had a cut on his arm from where he'd gotten too close to one of them, but it was clean, just a scrape, nothing that would turn him. Ben was uninjured but shaking, the reality of close combat catching up with him now that the adrenaline was fading. They cleared the 9th floor apartment by apartment, finding more undead in the units, finding evidence that this floor had been heavily populated when the outbreak started and most people hadn't made it out. Bodies in bedrooms, bodies in bathrooms, bodies that had been people trying to hide or barricade themselves but hadn't succeeded. It was grim work, putting down what remained of them, dragging the corpses to the stairwell for later disposal, trying not to think about who they'd been before. In apartment 9G, they found 2 college students, a guy and a girl, who'd barricaded themselves in a bathroom and had been surviving on water from the toilet tank and nothing else for 3 weeks. They were skeletal, barely conscious, and it took both Marcus and Tyler to carry them up to the 12th floor where the other survivors immediately started trying to rehydrate and feed them carefully, knowing that their bodies couldn't handle regular food yet after starvation. The girl kept mumbling, "Thank you," over and over, tears streaming down her hollow cheeks, and Marcus had to walk away because the gratitude was too much. Felt too heavy when he knew how close they'd come to not clearing the 9th floor at all, how close those kids had come to dying in that bathroom, while help was just 3 floors away. Day 25 Jim was too sore to continue, his shoulders swollen and painful despite not being seriously injured, so Tyler volunteered to take his place working with Marcus. The dynamic was different with Tyler. He was younger, more impulsive, wanted to prove himself in a way that made him take risks Jim wouldn't have taken. Marcus found himself in the position of being the cautious one, pulling Tyler back when he got too aggressive, reminding him that slow and steady was better than dead and heroic. The 8th floor was less populated with undead than the 9th, maybe 8 or 9 total, and they cleared it methodically, learning to work together, developing their own rhythm. Tyler was good with a crowbar, had clearly played some kind of sport that taught him how to swing with power and accuracy, and Marcus found himself relying on the gun less, saving ammunition, letting Tyler handle the close combat, while Marcus provided cover and watch. In apartment 8D, they found a family of 4, parents and 2 teenagers, a boy and a girl, who'd been surviving on rainwater collected from a leak in their ceiling and whatever food they'd had in their apartment when the world ended. The father had broken his leg somehow, had it splintered with pieces of chair and duct tape, and an infection was setting in, fever making him delirious. They got the family up to the 12th floor where the paramedic they'd rescued from floor 3 took one look at the leg and said he needed antibiotics immediately or he'd lose the leg, maybe his life. The medicine cabinets on the 8th floor yielded what they needed. Someone had stocked up on prescription antibiotics, probably for emergencies, and the paramedics started treatment immediately. Marcus watched the teenager girl hold her father's hand while he thrashed with fever and thought about David again, about sacrifice and survival and the thin line between them. Day 26, they cleared the 7th floor and it felt almost routine now, almost easy compared to the nightmare of the 9th floor. Only 5 undead total, most of the apartments empty, and they moved through it with practice efficiency. In apartment 7F, they found a retired teacher, a woman in her 60s who'd been a high school principal before the world ended, and she was sharp as a knife despite 3 weeks of isolation. She'd fortified her apartment brilliantly, had water collection systems and food rationing schedules written out on paper, had clearly been planning for long-term survival. When Marcus and Tyler offered to bring her up to the 12th floor, she asked them intelligent questions about the community structure, about resource distribution, about decision-making processes, and Marcus realized she was evaluating whether joining them would be an improvement over her current situation. When they told her about the greenhouse, about the supplies they were gathering and distributing equally, about the growing community of survivors working together, she nodded and said she'd come, but she wanted to contribute immediately, wanted to help organize and plan and make sure they weren't just surviving, but building something sustainable. Marcus liked her immediately, appreciated the way she thought in terms of systems and long-term strategy rather than just day-to-day survival. Naomi's cleaning crew had expanded to include Denise, Mrs. Brennan, and now the elderly woman from floor 11, and they worked with systematic efficiency to scrub away the evidence of death from each clear floor. The blood came up surprisingly easy with enough bleach and elbow grease, though the smell lingered, and Mrs. Brennan had found boxes of scented candles in one of the empty apartments that helped mask the worst of it. They'd also started painting over the bloodstains that wouldn't come out, using paint found in a maintenance closet on the 9th floor, making the hallways look almost normal again, almost like nothing terrible had happened there. The bodies went down to the basement incinerator, and Marcus had stopped thinking about the fact that they were cremating people who'd once been neighbors, once been human, because thinking about it too much would make the work impossible. The supply distribution happened every evening on the 12th floor, everyone gathering to see what had been found that day and dividing it equally. They'd found canned goods, bottled water, medicine, clothing, tools, batteries, candles, books, toys for the children, everything that people had stockpiled in their apartments before the world ended. Marcus kept a running inventory in a notebook he'd found, tracking what they had and what they still needed. Try and think ahead to winter when the greenhouse might not produce as much and they'd need to rely more heavily on stored food. The community was growing. They were up to maybe 40 people now spread across floors 12 through 7, and a retired teacher whose name was Dr. Patricia Chin started suggesting they needed formal organization, needed assigned roles and responsibilities, needed governance structure beyond just informal consensus. She volunteered to work with the Kovacs on agricultural planning, to help organize the greenhouse operation and plan crop rotations and seed saving. She suggested they start school for the children, keep them learning and growing instead of just surviving, give them structure and purpose. Marcus listened to her ideas and felt hope blooming in his chest because she was thinking in terms of months and years, not days and weeks. Thinking about how to build a real community instead of just a group of refugees hiding from the apocalypse. By the end of day 26, they cleared half the building, had rescued dozens of people, had created a functioning community with food and water and safety and purpose, and Marcus stood at his window looking down at the city and realized he wasn't scared anymore. He was tired, bone-deep exhausted from days of fighting and fear and responsibility, but he wasn't scared. They had a plan, they had people, they had resources, and they had 6 more floors to go before they reached ground level and could truly call the building secure. Only 6 more floors. Only 6 more floors between them and controlling their own destiny, between hiding and thriving, between surviving and actually living. He thought about the journey so far, the elderly couple nearly dead from starvation on 11, the woman and her son hiding in the closet on 10, the college student in the bathroom on 9, the family with the broken leg on 8, Dr. Chen's sharp mind on 7. Each floor had brought new people, new stories, new reasons to keep pushing forward. The building was transforming from a tomb into a community, from death into a place where people could actually live. The hallways that had been dark and terrifying were now lit and cleaned, populated with survivors who greeted each other, who shared meals, who watched each other's children, who worked together on the greenhouse and cleaning crews and watched rotations. It wasn't perfect. There were tensions, disagreements about resource allocation and decision-making, but it was functioning, it was working. It was proof that civilization hadn't completely collapsed as long as people chose to hold on to it. Marcus reloaded David's gun, counted his ammunition, 23 rounds left, and made a mental note to be more conservative with his shots, to rely more on Tyler's crowbar and his own baseball bat, to save the bullets for emergencies. He wondered what David would think if he could see what they'd accomplished with the weapon he'd left behind, if he'd be proud that his sacrifice had contributed to something bigger. Marcus liked to think he would be. Tomorrow they'd rest, let Jim's shoulder heal, let Tyler recover from 2 days of intense combat, let the cleaning crew finish floors 9 through 7. Then they'd push on to floors 6, 5, and 4, working down to ground level and the main entrance. The thought of reaching the ground floor, of barricading that entrance and securing the building, felt both impossible and inevitable. They'd come so far, overcome so much. 6 more floors shouldn't be impossible. Day 27 began with a rest day that nobody really rested during, because there was too much to do, too much momentum to maintain, too much nervous energy after a week of constant combat and clearing. Marcus spent the morning helping Dr. Chen organize the greenhouse operation, learning about crop rotation and pest management and water conservation, trying to absorb information that felt both vitally important and completely surreal given that 3 weeks ago he'd been a warehouse worker who bought his vegetables at the grocery store and never thought about where they came from. Jim's shoulder was healing but still sore, so he volunteered to help Naomi's cleaning crew, and Marcus watched him scrubbing blood off walls on the 9th floor and thought about how much they'd all changed, how quickly Normal had shifted from avoiding death to actively fighting it. Tyler and Ben were running inventory with the retired teacher, counting supplies and creating distribution schedules, and Marcus realized that somewhere along the way they'd stopped being just survivors and started being a functioning society. with roles and responsibilities and systems that went beyond just making it through another day. By afternoon, Marcus was restless again. The same cabin fever that had driven him to propose clearing the building in the first place. And he found himself standing at the 6th floor stairwell door with Jim, both of them armed and ready despite having planned to take the day off. They looked at each other, and Jim shrugged and said, "Might as well keep the momentum going." And Marcus nodded because he'd been thinking the same thing. The 6th floor was quiet when they opened the door, eerily quiet compared to the chaos of the 9th floor, and they moved through it cautiously, clearing apartment by apartment and finding mostly empty units. In apartment 6B, they found the body of the neighbor who'd been firing the gun on day 3, the one whose shots had echoed up through the stairwell and then stopped so abruptly. He was slumped against his bedroom wall with a pistol in his hand and a bullet hole in his head, and the whole apartment was barricaded and fortified like he'd been preparing for a siege. Marcus counted the bodies in the apartment, for undead that the man had put down before turning the gun on himself, probably when he ran out of ammunition or hope or both. They found his gun, a revolver with no bullets left, and more importantly, they found boxes of ammunition in his closet, different calibers, but including one that fit David's pistol. 50 rounds of ammunition, a fortune in this new world, and Marcus felt a complicated mixture of gratitude and sadness as he pocketed the bullets, knowing this dead stranger had just significantly improved their chances of clearing the rest of the building. They gave the man a moment of silence before adding him to the bodies bound for the incinerator, and Marcus found himself wondering what the man's name had been, if he'd had family somewhere, if anyone would ever know what he'd tried to do in his final moments. The 6th floor yielded no survivors, just empty apartments and a few more undead that they dispatched with practiced efficiency. And by the end of day 27, they'd added another floor to their secure territory, without anyone getting injured. Day 28, they moved to the 5th floor with renewed confidence. The ammunition find from the previous day making Marcus feel less anxious about conserving bullets, more willing to use a gun when it would make the clearing faster and safer. The 5th floor had maybe 6 undead total, scattered throughout the hallway and apartments, and they cleared it in a few hours, working smoothly together, Jim's shoulder clearly feeling better based on how he was swinging the machete. In apartment 5F, they found a young couple, maybe mid-20s, and the woman was visibly pregnant, her belly swollen and obvious even under the layers of clothes she was wearing. They were malnourished, terrified, and when Marcus and Jim broke through their barricade, the man tried to fight them with a kitchen knife before recognizing they were human and alive and there to help. The relief on their faces when Marcus explained about the greenhouse, about the community, about the safety just a few floors above, was almost painful to witness. The woman started crying and couldn't stop, just sobbing with her hands over her mouth while her partner held her and thanked Marcus over and over in a voice thick with emotion. They brought the couple up to the 12th floor where Dr. Chin immediately started fussing over the pregnant woman, checking her vital signs as best she could without proper medical equipment, estimating she was maybe 7 months along and severely malnourished, but the baby seemed to be okay. The community rallied around them immediately, people sharing their food rations to make sure the pregnant woman got enough calories, the paramedic creating a prenatal care plan with the limited resources available, everyone understanding that this baby represented something important, something hopeful, the first new life that will be born into their post-apocalypse community. The 5th floor also yielded practical supplies that were almost as valuable as the ammunition, baby items that the young couple had been stockpiling, diapers and bottles and formula and tiny clothes, things that would be crucial when the baby came. Marcus watched Naomi helping to organize the baby supplies and saw something shift in her expression, saw her thinking about her own children and maybe about future children, about a world where people could still have families and babies and hope for the future. Day 29, they approached the 4th floor with caution because Marcus remembered this was a floor that had been torn apart on day 3, the floor where they'd heard destruction and screaming, and he wasn't sure what they'd find. When they opened the stairwell door, the smell hit them first. Worse than the other floors, thicker, more pervasive, the smell of death that had been sitting for weeks in enclosed spaces. The hallway was destroyed, furniture overturned and scattered, doors broken off their hinges, walls gouged and stained. Clear evidence of violence and chaos. They moved through it slowly, weapons ready, and found apartment after apartment ransacked and empty. Signs that the undead had gotten in and torn through everything looking for prey. In apartment 4C, they found evidence of what had happened. A family had tried to barricade themselves in, but the undead had broken through, and the aftermath was scattered throughout the apartment in ways Marcus didn't want to look at too closely. They cleared the bodies quickly. Try not to think about the terror those final moments must have held, trying not to imagine the screams they'd heard from the 12th floor 3 weeks ago. But in apartment 4J, in an air vent in the bedroom ceiling, they found her, a teenage girl, maybe 16, wedged into the ductwork with barely enough room to breathe. She didn't respond when they called up to her, didn't move when they shined a flashlight on her, and for a moment Marcus thought she was dead. But then she blinked, slowly, like someone waking from a nightmare, and when they helped her down from the vent she couldn't stand, couldn't walk. Her muscles atrophied from weeks of staying completely still in a space too small to even sit up properly. She didn't speak, just stared at them with huge hollow eyes, and Marcus recognized the look of someone who'd broken somewhere deep inside, someone who'd survived in body but maybe not in mind. They carried her up to the 12th floor where Dr. Chun and the paramedic immediately started working on her, treating her for dehydration and malnutrition and muscle atrophy. But the psychological damage was harder to address. She'd been hiding in that vent since day 3, had listened to her family die in the apartment below, had stayed completely silent and still for 3 weeks while the undead wandered to the apartment beneath her, had survived through sheer frozen terror. Dr. Chin said she'd need time, care, therapy that they didn't have the resources to provide. But at least she was alive. At least she was safe now. At least the worst was over. The 4th floor's cleaning was the hardest yet. Naomi's crew working with grim determination to scrub away evidence of atrocities, using every drop of bleach and cleaning solution they had, painting over stains that wouldn't come out, try and make the space livable again, even though Marcus wasn't sure anyone would want to live on a floor with so much death soaked into it. But Dr. Chun said they needed the space, needed every apartment they could get as the community grew, and that erasing the evidence of what had happened was part of reclaiming the building, part of insisting that life would continue despite the horror. The supplies on the 4th floor were scattered and mostly destroyed, but they found tools that had survived the chaos. Hammers and screwdrivers and duct tape and rope, things that would be useful for fortification work. They found more canned goods and apartments the undead hadn't thoroughly ransacked. They found blankets and towels and first aid supplies. Everything salvageable they carried up for distribution, and by the end of day 29 they'd cleared 9 floors out of 12, had rescued more than 40 people total, had created a community that was starting to feel permanent. That night Marcus stood on the 7th floor landing, halfway between the 12th floor safety and the ground floor unknown, and looked up and down the stairwell. Above him was light and people and the sounds of community, children playing, adults talking, the normal sounds of human habitation. Below him was darkness and 3 more floors of unknown danger, and then the ground floor and the main entrance and the final barrier. 3 more floors. 3 more floors, and they had secured the entire building from top to bottom. 3 more floors, and they could seal the main entrance and truly call this place safe. Marcus thought about the teenage girl from the vent, about the pregnant woman and her partner, about all the people they'd found and saved, about the community they'd built from nothing. He thought about David and his sacrifice, about the gun that had killed him and was now being used to protect dozens of people, about how death and life were so tangled together in this new world that you couldn't separate them anymore. Tomorrow they'd rest again. Let the cleaning crews finish the 4th floor. Let everyone recover from the emotional toll of clearing that nightmare. Then they'd push on to floor 3 and 2, and finally down to ground level where the Real Challenge waited. The ground floor would have the most undead. Marcus knew. All the ones that had been trying to get up into the building for 3 weeks, drawn by the sounds and smells of human habitation above. The lobby would be packed with them, and clearing it would be dangerous in ways the upper floors hadn't been. But they'd learned so much, had gotten so much better at fighting and working together and staying safe. They had ammunition and weapons and a team that knew how to use them. They had a community waiting above that was counting on them to finish the job. And they had momentum, the knowledge that they'd already accomplished what had seemed impossible when they started. 3 more floors. Marcus could do 3 more floors. They all could. And then the building would be theirs, truly theirs, from a greenhouse on the roof to the barricaded lobby below, a vertical sanctuary in a horizontal wasteland. Proof that even in the apocalypse people could still build something worth protecting. He checked his ammunition. 63 rounds now, more than enough to clear 3 floors if they were smart. The gun felt lighter in his hand, more familiar, more like a tool than a weapon. He'd gotten better at using it, better at making shots count, better at reading situations. They'd all gotten better, had evolved from terrified survivors into something more capable. The transformation had happened gradually, and Marcus hadn't noticed until now. Standing in the stairwell and realizing he wasn't scared of what waited below. Cautious, yes. Respectful of the danger, absolutely. But not paralyzed. Fear didn't control him anymore. It motivated him, kept him sharp and alive. Day 30 started with confidence that Marcus hadn't felt since before the world ended. A sense that they were actually going to finish this. Actually going to secure the entire building and make it truly safe from top to bottom. The 3rd floor fell quickly, almost anticlimactically after the horror of the 4th floor. Only 4 undead scattered throughout the hallway. Most apartments empty, and they cleared in a few hours with Jim and Marcus working together like they'd been doing this for years instead of days. In apartment 3H, they found a middle-aged man who'd been a paramedic before the outbreak, and when he saw them, his first words were asking if anyone was injured, if anyone needed medical attention, his professional instincts overriding even his own desperation. He was malnourished and dehydrated, but still sharp, still focused on helping others. And when they brought him up to the 12th floor and introduced him to the other paramedic they'd rescued earlier, the 2 of them immediately started planning how to set up a proper medical station with the limited supplies available. The man had a fully stocked first aid kit in his apartment, had medical textbooks and basic diagnostic equipment, and he'd been treating his own injuries and illnesses for 3 weeks with the systematic approach of someone who knew what he was doing. Dr. Chin was delighted to have another medical professional in the community. Started talking immediately about creating a clinic on one of the secure floors, about training others in basic first aid, about preparing for the pregnant woman's delivery, and any other medical emergencies that might arise. The 3rd floor supplies included more medicine, more first aid materials, and surprisingly a cache of tools that someone had been hoarding. Hammers, nails, screws, a cordless drill with extra batteries, duct tape, rope, everything they'd need for serious fortification work. Marcus started thinking ahead to the ground floor, to barricading the main entrance, to making it absolutely impregnable, and these tools would make that possible. By the end of day 30, they cleared the 3rd floor completely, added another valuable member to their community, and gathered supplies that would be crucial for the final push. Day 31. They approached the 2nd floor with caution because it was the last barrier before ground level, the last floor standing between them, and the lobby that Marcus knew would be packed with undead. The stairwell door to the 2nd floor was partially broken, hanging off its hinges, and when they opened it they could hear the moaning from below, a sound that made Marcus's skin crawl, because there was so many voices, so much hunger, such a concentration of the undead, all drawn toward the building by 3 weeks of human habitation above. The 2nd floor itself was heavily infested, more undead than any floor except the 9th, and they were clustered near the stairwell leading down to ground level like they'd been trying to get up, drawn by sounds and smells from above. Marcus and Jim started clearing, but quickly realized they needed more help, and Tyler and Ben volunteered immediately. And then the paramedic they just rescued on day 30 asked if he could help too, said he knew how to swing a crowbar, and sitting around while others fought felt wrong. So they became a team of 5, working together to systematically clear the second floor, and it was brutal work, exhausting and dangerous and loud with gunshots and the sounds of melee combat. Marcus was down to 47 rounds by the time they cleared the hallway, and he made a mental note to be even more conservative going forward, because the ground floor was going to be worse, was going to require every bullet they had and maybe more. In apartment 2G, they found a young couple, 2 men who'd been living together when the outbreak started and had barricaded themselves so effectively that nothing had gotten through their door. They were in decent shape compared to most survivors, had rationed their food carefully and collected rainwater from their window, and when Marcus and Jim broke through their barricade, they came out fighting before realizing rescue had finally arrived. One of them broke down immediately, just collapsed to the floor sobbing with relief, while the other held him and thanked Marcus over and over in a voice that kept breaking. They brought the couple up to the community and watched as dozens of people welcomed them, offered food and water and comfort and safety, and Marcus felt that same swell of pride and purpose that he'd been feeling more and more often. They were building something real here, something that mattered, something worth protecting. The second floor clearing continued into day 32, the undead concentration near the ground floor stairwell requiring careful systematic elimination, and they worked in shifts to avoid exhaustion, rotating people in and out to keep everyone fresh. Naomi's cleaning crew had grown to include almost everyone who wasn't actively fighting. People volunteering to help scrub and disinfect and make the building livable, and Marcus realized the community had truly come together around this shared purpose. The second floor yielded its final survivors in apartment 2C, an elderly woman who'd been a librarian and had spent 3 weeks reading every book in her apartment to stay sane, reciting poetry to herself to drown out the sounds from outside. She was fragile but intellectually sharp, started talking immediately about organizing the books people had salvaged, about creating a library for the community, about education and culture, and maintaining humanity, even in apocalypse. Dr. Chin embraced her like a long-lost friend, and they immediately started planning together. 2 educated women who understood that survival wasn't enough, that they needed to preserve knowledge and culture and the things that made them human. By the end of day 32, the second floor was cleared and cleaned, the bodies disposed of, the supplies distributed, and all that remained was the ground floor. Day 33, they didn't clear anything, instead spending the day preparing for what everyone knew would be the most dangerous operation yet. Marcus called a meeting in the 12th floor hallway, everyone gathering to discuss strategy and make plans and prepare for the final push. The ground floor was an unknown quantity. They could hear the undead down there, could hear them clustered in the lobby and ground floor apartments, but they couldn't see how many or how they were distributed or what kind of obstacles they'd face. The plan they developed was systematic and careful. A large assault team, including everyone who could fight, working together to clear ground floor apartments first before tackling the lobby, using overwhelming force and careful coordination to minimize risk. Marcus would lead with a gun, Jim and Tyler would handle close combat with machete and crowbar, Ben and Robert would provide support, and several other survivors volunteered to help. People who'd been rescued and wanted to contribute to securing their new home. They spent the afternoon preparing weapons, sharpening blades, checking ammunition, organizing supplies. Dr. Chin organized the non-combatants into support roles. Medical team ready to treat injuries. Supplies team ready to gather anything useful. Cleaning crew ready to move in once areas were secured. Children and vulnerable people secured on upper floors. It felt like preparing for war, and in a way it was a final battle to claim their territory and make it truly theirs. That evening, Marcus stood in the lobby stairwell door on the second floor, looking down toward ground level, listening to the sounds from below. The moaning was constant, layered, dozens of voices, and he could see movement in the darkness, shapes shambling in the dim emergency lighting. Tomorrow they'd go down there, would wade into that concentration of undead, and fight their way to the main entrance, would barricade those doors and seal the building. Tomorrow they'd finish what they'd started 9 days ago, when Marcus first proposed this plan. 9 days. They'd cleared 9 floors in 9 days, had rescued more than 40 people, had built a functioning community from scattered survivors, had transformed a building full of death into a place where people could actually live. And tomorrow they'd complete the work, would secure that final floor, and make the building truly safe. Marcus checked his ammunition one last time. 47 rounds. Not as many as he'd like, but hopefully enough. He checked his baseball bat, the nails wrapped around the business, and creating a brutal but effective weapon. He thought about David and the gun he'd left behind, about all the people they'd rescued because of that gun, about how one man's sacrifice had rippled outward to save dozens of others. Tomorrow Marcus would use that gun to secure the ground floor, and if David was watching from wherever the dead went, Marcus hoped he'd be proud. The community gathered on the 12th floor that night for a meal together, everyone sharing food from the greenhouse and the supplies they'd gathered. Children play in the hallway, while adults talked quietly about tomorrow, about the plan, about what came after. The pregnant woman sat with her partner, her belly prominent now, a physical reminder that life continued even in apocalypse. Naomi's children ran past chasing each other, their laughter echoing off the walls, a sound that would have seemed impossible 3 weeks ago. Dr. Chun and the librarian were deep in conversation about education curriculum. The 2 paramedics were organizing medical supplies. The Kovacs were planning crop rotations with several volunteers who'd taken to greenhouse work. It was a community, a real functioning community, and they'd build it together through shared purpose and mutual support, and the simple decision to help each other survive. Marcus looked around at all these people, these strangers who become family, and felt something he hadn't felt in weeks. Hope, real genuine hope that they'd make it through this, that they'd build something lasting, that the future might actually be worth living toward. He watched Jim laughing with Tyler, watched Naomi helping the pregnant woman get comfortable, watched the children playing cards someone had found, watched Dr. Chin gesturing animatedly while explaining something to the librarian. This was what they were fighting for, not just survival, but this community connection, the small moments of normalcy that made life worth living even when the world outside had ended. The weapons they gathered were laid out on tables in the hallway. Marcus's gun and ammunition, Jim's machete with its notched blade, Tyler's crowbar, baseball bats and kitchen knives and repurposed tools. They'd come so far from that first day when Marcus and Jim had descended to the 11th floor with shaking hands and racing hearts. Now they were a coordinated fighting force, experienced and capable, ready to take on the ground floor. Robert the paramedic was sharpening a hatchet he'd found, testing the edge, and he caught Marcus looking and smiled. "Never thought I'd be doing this when I went to medical school," he said. "Thought I'd be saving lives in an ER, not fighting zombies with a hatchet." Marcus smiled back. "Never thought I'd be leading a combat team when I was working the night shift at a warehouse. Guess the apocalypse brings out skills we didn't know we had." They talked for a while about their lives before, about the normalcy they'd taken for granted, about families and friends they might never see again. It was easy to talk about it now, with some distance from those first terrible days, easier to acknowledge what they'd lost without being overwhelmed. The grief was still there, would always be there, but it had become something they could carry rather than something that crushed them. As the evening wore on, people drifted back to their apartments to sleep, and Marcus found himself alone in the hallway, standing at the 12th floor barricade they'd built on day 4 and had never needed to defend because they'd taken the fight to the enemy instead of waiting. It felt like a lifetime ago, that decision to clear the building, even though it had only been 9 days. 9 days that had transformed everything, that had taken them from isolated and scared to organized and purposeful. Tomorrow they'd clear the ground floor, and then the building would be secure. 12 stories of safety with a garden on the roof and a community inside. Tomorrow they'd finish the work. Tonight they'd rest and prepare and remember that they were human, that they were alive, that they were together, and that had to be enough. Day 34. Dawn breaking over a dead city, and Marcus stood with his assault team on the second floor landing. Everyone armed and ready for what they all knew would be the hardest fight yet. The team had grown to 8 people. Marcus with David's gun, Jim with his machete, Tyler and Ben with crowbars, Robert the paramedic with a hatchet, and 3 other survivors who'd proven themselves capable, all of them carrying makeshift weapons and grim determination. They'd spent the morning psyching themselves up, checking weapons one last time, reviewing the plan that Dr. Chun had helped them refine. Clear the ground floor apartments systematically before attempting the lobby. Work as a coordinated unit. Watch each other's backs. Don't take unnecessary risks. The ground floor apartments would be first, safest to tackle while they were fresh, and then when those were secured, they'd face the lobby and whatever concentration of undead had been pressing against the main entrance for 3 weeks. Marcus opened the stairwell door, and the smell hit them immediately. Stronger than any floor above, the concentrated stench of death and decay that made several people gag. The ground floor hallway was dimly lit, and they could see undead scattered throughout, maybe a dozen visible from the doorway, but more probably in the apartments. They moved in formation, Marcus and Jim leading, the others spreading out to cover flanks and rear, and the fighting started immediately as the undead noticed them and began shambling forward. Marcus fired carefully, making each shot count, dropping undead with headshots while Jim and the others handled close combat, and they pushed forward into the hallway, clearing it meter by meter. The ground floor apartments were heavily infested, almost every unit containing undead, and they cleared them one by one with systematic efficiency that came from 9 days of practice. In apartment 1C, they found 2 more survivors, an elderly man and his adult son who'd barricaded themselves so thoroughly it took 10 minutes to convince them to open the door, and when they finally did, both men were skeletal and weak but alive. The team kept clearing, kept fighting, kept pushing forward through apartment after apartment, and by mid-afternoon, they'd secured all the ground floor units and found 4 more survivors total. People who'd been trapped down here in the worst possible location, closest to main entrance and the concentration of undead trying to get in. Every survivor they found was brought up to the community waiting on the upper floors, and Marcus felt that familiar surge of satisfaction, knowing they'd saved more lives, rescued more people who would have died waiting for help that never came. But the apartments had only been the warm-up, and when they finished clearing the last unit, Marcus gathered the team, and they all knew what came next. The lobby, the main entrance, the final barrier. They approached the lobby entrance carefully, weapons ready, and Marcus could hear the moaning before they even opened the door, a chorus of undead voices that made his skin crawl. When they pushed through into the lobby, the sight that greeted them was worse than he'd imagined. The space was packed with undead, 30 or 40 of them at least, all clustered near the main entrance like they'd been trying to claw their way through the glass doors for weeks. The doors themselves were smeared with blood and gore, the glass cracked in places, and Marcus could see more undead outside pressing against the entrance, drawn by the ones inside or by some instinct that told them humans were in this building. The assault team spread out and attacked as a coordinated unit, Marcus firing into massive bodies while the others waded in with melee weapons, and the fighting was brutal and chaotic and terrifying. The undead kept coming, kept pressing forward, and Marcus was burning through ammunition faster than he wanted, each shot dropping on them, but there were so many. Jim took a hit to the arm, not a bite, but a hard enough blow that Marcus heard something crack, and Tyler pulled him back while Ben and Robert stepped up to cover the gap. The team rotated positions, fresh fighters moving forward, while injured ones fell back, and they fought their way toward the main entrance through sheer determination and violence. Marcus's gun clicked empty, and he dropped the magazine, fumbled for a fresh one, reloaded and kept firing, and slowly, Painfully, they cleared the lobby, bodies piled up, the floor slick with blood and worse. And when the last undead finally fell, Marcus stood there breathing hard and counting heads. Everyone's still alive. Several injuries, but no bites, no infections, no losses. They'd done it. They'd cleared the ground floor. But the job wasn't finished yet, because they could see undead outside the main entrance, dozens of them pressing against the glass. And those doors needed to be secured. The team worked together to start building a barricade, using furniture from the lobby and ground floor apartments, stacking couches and tables and anything heavy against the doors. Someone had found welding equipment in a maintenance closet, and Robert, who'd apparently taken shop class in high school, started welding metal bars across the door frames, creating permanent barriers that nothing could break through. They worked for hours, building the fortification layer by layer, and other survivors came down from the upper floors to help, carrying supplies and materials, everyone contributing to this final crucial task. Dr. Chen organized teams to bring down the tools they'd salvaged, and they used hammers and nails and screws to reinforce the furniture barricade, used duct tape and rope to tie everything together, created a barrier that was part construction project and part work of art. By the time the sun started setting on day 34, the main entrance was completely sealed, metal bars welded across the doors, furniture stacked and secured, every possible entry point blocked and reinforced. Marcus stood back and looked at what they'd built and felt something shift in his chest, a weight lifting that he hadn't realized he was carrying. The building was secure. Actually, truly secure. From the greenhouse on the roof to the barricaded lobby below. Every floor cleared and cleaned, every survivor rescued, every threat eliminated. They'd done what had seemed impossible 10 days ago, when Marcus first proposed clearing the building. They reclaimed 12 stories from the apocalypse. Day 35, they didn't fight, didn't clear, didn't risk anything. Instead, they worked on final fortification, double-checking every barricade, securing every ground floor window, making certain nothing could get in. Naomi's cleaning crew did their final pass through the lobby, scrubbing away battle evidence, painting over stains, making the space look almost normal. Dr. Chen organized a full building inspection, checking every floor to make sure nothing had been missed, and Marcus accompanied her, walking through each hallway and seeing the transformation they'd accomplished. The building was alive again, not with death, but with people, with community, with sounds of human habitation. Children playing in hallways, adults working the greenhouse, people cooking communal meals, neighbors talking and laughing and living. 47 people total, rescued from isolation and despair and given a chance to survive together. The pregnant woman was doing well, the paramedics estimating she had maybe 6 weeks before delivery, and people were already planning, preparing. The teenage girl from the air vent was talking again, slowly, healing with Dr. Chun and the librarian's help. The building had apartments for everyone, multiple floors of secured living space, and people were starting to personalize their units, making them homes instead of just shelters. The greenhouse was producing consistently, the Kovacs training multiple people in agricultural techniques, so the knowledge wouldn't be lost. They had water from rain collection and the building systems. They had power from the solar panels. They had medicine and supplies salvaged from dozens of apartments. They had weapons and defenses. They had each other. That evening, Marcus called everyone together in the lobby, standing where the main entrance had been cleared and secured, and looked at the faces of community they'd built. Naomi with her 3 children, the kids healthy and playing again instead of hiding in fear. Jim with his arm in a sling, but already healing. Tyler and Ben looking proud and capable, no longer just scared college kids, but valued members of the team. Dr. Chun and the librarian already planning education programs. The 2 paramedics organizing their clinic. The pregnant woman and her partner preparing for their baby. The Kovacs who'd share their greenhouse and their knowledge. The elderly couple from the 11th floor who'd nearly starved but now helped tend the garden. The young gay couple from the 2nd floor who'd found safety and acceptance. The survivors from every floor, every apartment, every story of survival against impossible odds. They were a community now, a real functioning society, and they built it together through shared purpose and mutual support and the simple decision to help each other survive. Marcus didn't give a speech, didn't know what to say that would capture what they'd accomplished, but Dr. Chin stepped forward and spoke for everyone. "We did something remarkable," she said, her voice carrying in the lobby. "We took a building full of death and turned it into a home full of life. We rescued each other. We protected each other. We built something worth protecting. And we'll keep building, keep growing, keep living for as long as it takes. Because that's what humans do. We survive. We adapt. We help each other. And we never give up." People cheered. Actually cheered. The sound echoing off the lobby walls and up through the stairwells. A sound of triumph and hope and defiance. They'd survived the end of the world. They'd built something new from the ruins. And they'd keep going day by day, floor by floor, together. Marcus looked at the barricaded main entrance, at the welded metal bars and stacked furniture, keeping the dead city outside where it belonged, and then turned to look up through the stairwell at the floors above, at the light and life and community they created. From the top floor above the undead to the secured lobby below, the building was theirs. A vertical sanctuary, a home, a future. He thought about the journey that had brought them here, about waking up on day one to emergency alerts and watching the world collapse, about the fear and isolation of those first weeks, about David's sacrifice in the greenhouse and the decision to clear the building floor by floor. 10 days ago, he'd been going stir-crazy, and now he'd led a team that secured 12 floors and rescued dozens of people. He'd changed too, Marcus realized. He wasn't the same person who'd woken up 3 weeks ago. That Marcus had been afraid, had hidden, and hoped someone else would fix things. This Marcus was someone who took action, who led teams, who made hard decisions. The apocalypse had broken something in him, but also built something new, something stronger, something capable of surviving. The undead were still out there, thousands wandering the dead city, and rescue might never come. The world might stay broken forever. But inside this building, on these 12 floors, life continued. People laughed and cried and worked and played and planned for tomorrow. Children grew up, babies would be born, knowledge would be preserved. They had food and water and shelter and each other. And as long as they had those things, they could survive anything. Marcus walked through the lobby one more time, checking the barricades, making sure everything was secure, and then headed up to his apartment on the 12th floor. The climb up 12 flights used to seem impossible, but now it was routine, his legs strong from days of clearing and fighting. He passed neighbors on the stairs, exchanged greetings, felt the warmth of community. His apartment was waiting, still mostly the same as day one except cleaner, more organized, filled with supplies he gathered. He stood at his window one last time looking down at the city, at the fires that had finally burned out, at the undead still wandering below, at the world that had ended. But he didn't feel despair. Instead, he felt purpose, satisfaction, hope. They'd survived. They'd built something. And tomorrow they'd wake up and keep building, keep surviving, keep living. The building was secure. The community was strong. And whatever came next, they'd face it together.